Welcome to the live stream, everybody. Today we're going to talk about what does the afterlife actually look like. And in the last three parts, we've gone through all the evidence for the afterlife, and I want to run through that really quickly for those of you who missed those parts and just to refresh your memory. So this evidence comes from over 2,500 reincarnation cases studied at the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, with over 50 years of research. There are 5,750 near-death accounts in the near-death experience reference database. They are in 23 different languages, and they are cross-referenced with medical records, and they are self-reported. There are also direct studies of 900 plus cardiac arrest patients. These are prospective studies where they study every single person who encountered or experienced cardiac arrest and was brought back. And a lot of our information about near-death experiences comes from those scientific studies. And these were published in major medical journals like The Lancet, the Journal of American Medicine, and the American Medicine Association, the Annals of the New York Academy of Science, NEJM, the BMJ, the National Institute of Health, Funded Research, Bigelow Institute, University of Virginia, University of Southampton. So the point is, this is not fringe science. This is stuff that has been studied for years and years, decades. Well-documented cases, that's what I want to cover. I'm not covering things that people argue about. These are things that scientists agree happened. And in this evidence, you will see you have seen over the last 4 or 5 weeks, 5 independent fields converging. Study on reincarnation, study on terminal lucidity, near-death experiences, mediumship, and biblical scholarship. And importantly, there is no materialist framework that even attempts to explain this scientific data, this evidence, these facts. I want that to sink in, and I hope that it will sink in over the course of this presentation. I want to start with the first and the most powerful piece of evidence, in my opinion. Anna Katerina Emmer. She never spoke a word in 26 years. She was born severely intellectually disabled, and in 26 years never spoke a single word. Now imagine working in the hospital where this woman is dying. Just before she died, she began singing hymns with the correct words and melodies. Again, imagine working in this hospital and experiencing this woman suddenly spontaneously singing. This is called terminal lucidity, and it's been well studied. By the National Institute of Health, it calls terminal lucidity a potential paradigm shift, and it's documented in medical literature for over 250 years. A brain destroyed by decades of Alzheimer's can suddenly function as if the brain was unimportant in generating consciousness. We have examples where congenitively blind people, that is, people born blind from birth, with no optic nerve, no experience of vision in their life, accurately describe visual scenes during near-death experiences, verified across 31 particular cases. In these cases, these people who have never seen anything are describing to researchers real visual scenes from their medical care. Similarly, near-death experiencers accurately describing real events while clinically brain dead, verified by medical staff in 92% of 107 investigated cases, where people were able to describe the physical environment in which they died because they had an out-of-body experience, even though they were brain dead. And in one case, Pam Reynolds' case, that we talked about, The blood had been drained from her head. Her brainstem was inactive. There was loud music in her, or loud noise in her ear as part of the surgery to guarantee that she had no brain activity. And she described several things during her surgery while she was completely brain dead. In 344 cardiac arrest studies, there was zero correlation between near-death experiences and medications, oxygen levels, duration of cardiac arrest, or of religious belief. If the brain caused these experiences, then most patients should have them. Or, as has been argued many times, these would be oxygen deprivation and we could measure it and see some sort of correlation, but there is no correlation with those things. Finally, as I mentioned before, the University of Virginia DOPS division of their medical school has been studying this for over 50 years with 2,500 different cases measured with 200 different variables in each case. Here's an image of a blind person seeing. You could see that they suddenly are able to have visual experiences that they describe to researchers, an absolute impossibility in the modern, in the scientific materialist worldview. If a brain has never encountered anything visual, never had an optic nerve, how is she describing physical, visual images? This is an image, because there isn't a great picture of Emmer, the lady who was singing hymns. But imagine, right, again, put yourself in this hospital, and it was the beginning of the 1900s. Everyone in the hospital knows who this woman is. She hasn't spoke a word in 26 years, and now she's singing hymns with correct words and in tune. Imagine this. And here's an example of what has been described very often in the near-death experience, an out-of-body experience where they hover above the scene, and this is how they can see and describe the different things that they do end up describing that are verified by the medical staff. Many cases studied, again, over 5,700 cases in the near-death experience database. More evidence. Children as young as 2 describing verifiable details of deceased strangers' lives. Names, locations, manner of death, with no possible access to this information. Again, 2-year-olds. Birthmarks on these children that match the wounds on the deceased, and they have been confirmed by autopsy in 49 different cases. The odds against having 2 double birthmark cases, there's 18 different birthmark cases. The chances of that is, I calculated on the stream, a number with 79 zeros behind it. Case strength does not correlate with family belief in reincarnation. In fact, the U.S. has the most documented cases in this database. This is the 2,500 reincarnation cases in the files at the University of Virginia DOPS. And the Journal of American Medicine reviewed this evidence in 1975 and called it, quote, difficult to explain on any other grounds. In quintuple blind mediumship studies, now again, mediums are people who claim to be able to contact the dead and deceased. In a quintuple blind designed experiment where there is no contact, no meeting, and only a first name given to the mediums produced verified, accurate information at a p of less than 0.001, which, for those of you who don't understand the statistics, is 500 times stronger than the threshold for approving pharmaceutical drugs. And again, this is under these conditions where the medium has no idea who the person is that they're trying to read from. They only have a first name. Dead scientists simultaneously contacted 3 mediums. These scientists were working in this field in the early 1900s, and they all passed away, and then they delivered a message to mediums across the planet with a fragmented message designed from the other side to rule out telepathy, which was, at the time, the explanation for mediums' abilities. And again, I pointed out how ridiculous this is, that the only explanation for the results of these studies and the fact that mediums were actually contacting the dead was, maybe the mediums are simply reading the minds of all the living people who have this information just by accident. And so the 3 dead scientists designed an experiment from heaven and delivered those messages to mediums to prove their point. We went over the biblical evidence. I'm not going to go over all of it, but I want to mention the most important one, which is where Jesus explicitly identified John the Baptist as the reincarnation of Elijah in Matthew 11 and 17, chapters 11 and 17. Emperor Justinian imprisoned the Pope for 8 years to erase reincarnation from Christianity. Another quote from the Bible. In Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, God says, "I knew you before you were born." The doctrine of reincarnation and existence before birth was erased by imperial decree and by imprisoning the Pope. Can you imagine the Pope imprisoned for almost a decade in a foreign country? He was abducted from Italy, brought to Constantinople, where he was imprisoned for 8 years, while Justinian told him what he needed to do, which was give in to his demands and erase reincarnation from the Bible, from doctrine. This is an ancient political scandal. 1,500 years ago, this happened, and if you can imagine it happening today, would you believe? Would you agree to the changes that were made by the council in which the Pope was finally released? Studies that have come later have shown that it was a farce, and that Origen, who wrote about reincarnation in Christianity, was declared a heretic in an improper council. Origen was one of the great thinkers of early Christianity. And you should also know that Justinian, who imprisoned the Pope, was seen as the Antichrist, as the devil, by practicing Christians of the time, because he was so clearly interfering with the practice of their religion, with their understanding of what they were practicing. So again, we have 5 independent scientific fields: reincarnation studies, terminal lucidity, near-death research, mediumship, and biblical scholarship. And they all point in the same direction. And there's not even an attempt by the mainstream to explain it. There's the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, just a few of them, in case you didn't believe me that it exists. This is the point of everything that I've said so far and in the previous 5 weeks. The coherent scientific position is consciousness survives death. And I want to talk to you guys directly about my personal experience of encountering this evidence. Because I am a biomedical engineer. I have a master's in biomedical engineering from the University of Michigan. I always thought I would be a scientist or a doctor. I ended up wanting to be a scientist because I wanted to do research. I took the scientific community at face value, that they will look at all the evidence and give the best possible explanation for it. This is not the case on this topic. The evidence clearly says consciousness survives death. And yet the mainstream position of nearly every scientist out there is, we don't know. We do know. And I feel like I'm the only scientist in the world who's willing to say that it's real. Not only is it real, but it's impossible to explain the convergence of evidence in any other way. Go ahead, try. Try. They don't even try. To me, the level of intellectual dishonesty that's required to do that is staggering. It's mind-blowing to me. And I've said it on the stream before, it's almost a curse of mine that I can't ignore the truth. When I see the truth, I have to pursue it. And then I have to live my life by what the truth says. The good news is that doing this work, I've found that the truth is the best possible news that you could possibly imagine. Because the world and the universe and creation is designed by God to be beautiful, amazing, wonderful, awe-inspiring, filled with love, filled with peace, filled with hope, filled with inspiration. And yes, filled with all the negative things as well. Because you cannot have the positive without the negative. After I find this evidence, and I can tell you guys my personal experience, I've told it many times, when I don't know if I've given you this part of the story, but when I healed my father in the hospital, I was actually teaching middle school science. And I encountered this healing of my father, and as I talked about in the previous presentation, it's almost a example of terminal lucidity. That's how I experienced it. And I don't know if God was showing me that healing is real while simultaneously giving my father a final reprieve to communicate with us, but he had been basically in a coma, not interacting with us. The last thing I remember him saying before he fell into the coma was, "I want to die." And he was in great pain, and he was bleeding every day. They would put another unit of blood or more into him. He was bleeding internally for months. And when I healed him, he stopped bleeding. His infections went away. His blood pressure normalized. His temperature went to normal. The doctors came in the morning and said, "We can't explain any of this, but he's improved on every metric." That phrase, I feel like is hitting me now for the first time, whatever this is, 17 years later. Because it fits perfectly with this presentation. We can't explain it, but he's improved on every metric. Now, isn't that important? As a scientist, which those doctors claim to be, shouldn't they be asking questions? Shouldn't they want to find out and know the answer why? But instead, 2 of my family members observed it. The doctors observed it. My father came back to consciousness. He was happy. And nobody said another word about the healing, except me. I never forgot. I've talked a lot about it. But everyone else involved put it under the rug. Just like this evidence. Just like this evidence. And so, after I healed my father, I was still teaching. And I went back to my kids, and there I am, trying to force them to learn things out of this textbook, to get them to study and do their homework and get ready for the test and complete their projects on time. And I couldn't do it. And I actually gave a speech. I wrote a speech, and that was all I did that day. I had 144 students, and I gave a speech to them, and I said, I can't stand up here and tell you you better listen to me or you're going to fail. Because I don't know anything. And that's the truth. And I think that kids would be far more receptive. And believe me, all the kids were absolutely silent while I gave this speech. Groups of kids that were 30 plus kids, inner city school kids, they were rapt with attention when I gave this speech. I'm going to have to share this speech on the stream sometime. So that's how I feel now. I have this biomedical engineering degree. What does it mean? One of the premises of biomedical engineering is that the brain generates consciousness. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And we'll see more evidence as we go further into this presentation. So what would they have to argue? Let's present the skeptic argument. The skeptic would have to argue that a dying brain shutting down spontaneously generates a pedagogically sophisticated, that is, teaching the person a fully customized teaching experience containing accurate information that the experiencer never possessed, and delivers it through total sensory immersion from perspectives the experiencer never occupied, and it follows a consistent evaluative framework matching across thousands of cases worldwide. And finally, produces transformative effects persisting over 20 years. That is not a simpler explanation. That's a more extraordinary claim than consciousness surviving death. This evidence has been around for 50 years, and it's been ignored. So I'm here to tell you that if you are an intellectually honest person, you will say, consciousness survives death. That is my scientific position. That is my fact-based, evidence-based position. Debate me, bro. I dare you to look at the evidence and give me any other explanation. I want to see you try, because they don't even try. They don't even try. And what does this silence cost us? They write the worldview. The worldview is atheist. It's materialistic. It's selfish. It pervades the textbooks, the culture, the media. What counts as real? On the single most important question a human can ask, what happens after I die? What is the purpose of life? They have no answer, even though the evidence is right there. So I'm here to indict them, to call them to account, to answer for their silence, if they call themselves scientists. You know, when I was studying this, and finding the research was just so amazing that I couldn't stop myself. I basically was just nonstop researching as I got ready for this particular presentation, almost so much that I wish I had prepared a little more, but that's okay. I think it's still a great presentation. But studying this is so fascinating to me. And yet, most people have ignored it, and their response to it is to attack it. It's not to intellectually, honestly look at the cases and say, wow, I need to study this more, or this needs more study, or something. Most of them ignore it, and some of them actively attack it. And I actually found a few cases of that. People that seem like decent scientists, decent people, they are so threatened by this information that they try to pick apart the cases that are the most interesting. Like the James Leninger reincarnation case that we covered 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. And they can poke little holes in it here and there. And yeah, based on human fallibility and people trying to get money, maybe they embellish this or that. But that's one case out of 2,500. Try doing that for all of them. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And for any one case or fact, you can tweak it or say, oh, maybe it's this other thing. But until you offer an alternative explanation for the entire group of evidence, you're just lying. So that's my rant, folks. We got nobody watching, so I'm just going to keep going, I guess. I guess we have Susan. My mom's watching, so thank you, Mom, for being my only fan today. I love you. She says, God knew you before you were born. We chose what life we want to learn from. And I will be covering that as well, Susan. There is evidence that what you're saying is absolutely true. Documented evidence. Susan says, improved on every metric because you sent energy healing to your dad. Yeah, and I think God also wanted to give him that opportunity, that terminal lucidity. What is terminal lucidity? You know? I don't know. We don't know. We can't know. We can ask God and maybe we'll get an answer. But is anybody going to believe us? Maybe, maybe not. I can just guess. I think one of the reasons that makes sense to me is it gives people a chance to say goodbye to their loved ones. It lets the transition from life to death be easier for them and for their loved ones. And it certainly was for me, and it was a profound experience. You know, I think we come to earth and we forget that we are spirit and that we are connected to God and that our true home is heaven, and that is by design so that we can experience the most difficult environment and learn how to love anyways. But we are allowed to remember who we are by studying logically, by understanding and looking at reality. We cannot actually get out of God's grace. This is what the Bible teaches. This is what Jesus taught. He said, all you have to do is believe in me and you will be saved. It's an instantaneous process because it never was not the case. I got in a lot of trouble saying we are always saved. And that's what I mean. We're always saved. People might deny Jesus. They might deny being saved. And so they experience something very negative. And there are near-death experiences that sound like hell. But in almost every case, the person cried out to God or they cried out to Jesus and they were immediately saved. They were immediately taken out of their suffering. That they themselves acknowledged that they constructed their own hell. That's what the evidence says. Eleanor says she's here. That's great. I know. My wife is also here. She loves me too. So my two best fans living in the house and the only people watching. For those of you watching the replay, please comment, like, and subscribe, and show up live because I want to talk to you live. That's why I do this. I had a thought today. I was like, I'll just stop doing the live stream because people don't come live, and I think edited videos do better as far as getting out there, and very few people watch it. And maybe instead of doing the live stream, I'll meet people in person, talk to them in person, because that's the whole point of it. Tell me what you guys think. Hey, Ian's here. I can't tell. My counter says there's only 2 people, so I guess somebody left and then Ian came in. So welcome. Yeah, we're gonna finally meet Jesus, and there's actually stories of people who did meet Jesus. Hey, now it says 3. We're at our high of the day. Thank you, Ian, for joining us. It's a real live stream now when there's people not in the building tuning in. But yeah, there are stories of people meeting Jesus while they're still alive. I read a book about it, and after all the things that I've studied, it seems like it's real. So if you want to meet Jesus, all you have to do is keep asking him to appear and believe that he will appear, and eventually he will. That is my belief. Chat disconnected. Please wait while we try to reconnect you. Okay, it's working. Ian says there were only 4 people working out yesterday. Are you saying everybody's gone, Ian? Maybe. Maybe. So let's get back into the presentation. Again, consciousness survives death. This is the scientifically coherent position. And it completely upends biology, physics, psychology, and basically every field of science is completely upended by the idea that consciousness is separate from our physical bodies. And that is what all of this evidence points to, as well as pointing to what the very nature of the afterlife looks like. And that's what we're going to get into. I hope for those of you who have joined. Eleanor says, I think the internet is just so cheap and accessible now, like what Tinder did for dating, YouTube has done for philosophy. Is that why nobody's tuned in? Yeah, it's all right. I think it's all by design. I think this information is ahead of its time, and I anticipate that it will be discovered down the line as I get better at marketing, but also as more people are willing to hear it and willing to accept it. So let's get into what is the actual structure of the afterlife. We get most of this information from near-death experiences because that's where most of the data comes from. There was a 2022 consensus statement issued by the joint universities of Harvard, Baylor, University of Virginia, University of Southampton, and King's College in London that said, quote, the recalled experiences surrounding death are not consistent with hallucinations, illusions, or psychedelic drug-induced experiences. That's as far as they're willing to go. But that's a pretty powerful explanation. They are saying that all of the common explanations for near-death experiences are not what the data says. These things are not hallucinations. They are not illusions. And they are not the same as a drug trip. Mescaline or there's a DMT. Some people say if you take DMT, it's like a near-death experience. No, that's not what the science says. That's not to say that psychedelic drugs can't give people spiritual awakenings. I'm not saying that. But near-death experiences are a different thing. I'm getting disconnected on the chat. That's okay. Something to realize about these experiences, up to 800 million people now, globally, have experienced a near-death experience based on the research. 18 million Americans in the U.S. alone, at a minimum. And again, 5,750 plus documented accounts in the database in 23 different languages with cross-references to medical records and statements by medical personnel confirming what the near-death experiencer described. And the data shows that as resuscitation technology improves, we are seeing deeper experiences, more and more reports. And so this data, this field of data is growing every year, and it grows with technology. I tried to get AI to generate an image of 800 million people. It's not even close. It's not even close. Maybe that's 200,000. But if you can imagine the amount of people on the earth that have had a near-death experience, and we're going to go through what that means. But you have to understand that there's an acceleration taking place. The mainstream can't keep ignoring this data. You know, we've talked about the Yuga cycle and the ascending age. People talk about the new age. Everyone can see that humanity is changing. Things are changing rapidly. And this is one of them. Evidence for the afterlife is becoming more and more impossible to ignore and deeper. More and more information about the afterlife is coming out through these near-death experiences. So stay tuned, folks, because we are going to get into the details of the near-death experience and the afterlife and the life review. In one example, a person's entire life was reviewed, and every moment and every effect that that person had on others was shown to them. And the single most important moment of their life was stopping to love a flower growing out of a crack in the sidewalk. They were told that their career, their biggest decisions, even being president of the United States, did not compare to her simple act of loving a flower that no one else had noticed. If you want to understand why, keep watching. This is the funnel, okay? This is what people experience in their near-death experiences. 60% of people experience peace. 37% experience body separation. So a near-death experience. 23% describe a tunnel and darkness. 16% describe seeing the light at the end of that tunnel. And 10% describe entering the light. And they often enter what can only be described as heaven. And in those accounts are some of the most incredible because they describe literally the environment that they find themselves in. Cities, beautiful gardens, councils of angels, Jesus speaking to them and meeting with them. But what's remarkable from this diagram is that this is your first example of how people who experience near-death experiences have the same experience across all of the different evidence. There is what is seen as phases of the afterlife. And remarkably, you can see at the bottom there, the closer the person comes to irreversible death, the deeper their experience is. This means that researchers were grading how dangerous the situation was, how likely the person was to die. I mean, all of them, most of them, I think not all of them, but most of them had cardiac arrest or something life-threatening. But the ones that had something extremely life-threatening were the ones that had the deepest experiences. And that, again, the p-value, the chance of that happening by chance is 1 in 10,000. Also, we see this same sequence across cultures, across religions, across languages, including non-Western societies with no exposure to near-death experiences. We find the same sequence in children too young to have absorbed adult ideas about death. And remarkably, the same sequence is documented historically in medical literature for over 250 years. And there are accounts that go back into the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and antiquity. The things that these people describe are described by Jesus. He says, "In my Father's house are many mansions." There are multiple descriptions by Jesus of heaven, and they correlate with what near-death experiencers describe when they do reach heaven, in the rare case that they do. It's been described by mystics like Yogananda, Swedenborg, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And as Yale's mentioned, in Kabbalah, it is also described. So what does it mean that science is confirming what the mystics taught? Yogananda's guru appeared to him after death and described the astral world with vivid light, telepathy. It's as more real than physical, as identical to the near-death reports. These mystics didn't have access to each other's work across centuries and cultures, but they described the same thing. Science isn't discovering something new, it's catching up with something ancient, and probably more than ancient, eternal, eternally true. That our home is heaven, that we are spiritual, just visiting Earth. We knew this, and it was taken from us. We look again at the historical evidence of things being erased from Christianity, things being removed from doctrine because they gave the church and the empire more political power. I've been talking, it's funny, over like 3 or 4 times, the Ethiopian Bible has come up in conversation separately for me in the last 2 weeks. The Ethiopian Bible has all the books of the Bible plus 22 more that were removed. What I've seen is that those things were moved purposefully, politically, to gain power and to hide the truth. Nearly all near-death experiencers describe these things: a complete and immediate absence of pain upon passing or upon this experience. I've heard so many near-death experiences. One of the most profound things that you can check is listening to near-death experiences, listening to the actual interviews. And what's remarkable is these people are encountering some of the most dangerous situations, some of the most painful situations. And it's not that they never feel pain. Actually, they usually feel most of the pain after they come back from heaven. But first, they are usually separated from their body before they can feel any pain. They experience overwhelming peace and love. This is a ubiquitous description, unlike any earthly experience. 74.4% report that it is supernormal, as in more real than physical life. The vast majority of them say physical life is hazy, cloudy, narrow compared to what they experienced in their near-death experience. Again, more real than real. 75% of near-death experiencers say that, whereas only 19% of psychedelics takers say that. They also describe encountering deceased loved ones, and we'll get more into those details. And so what we see is consciousness expands when the brain shuts down. If the brain generated consciousness, less brain means less experience. But with near-death experiencers, they report more experience. The fact that they remember any of this with a flattened brain waves proves that memory isn't stored in the brain. How are they generating memories while their brain doesn't have any oxygen or blood or electrical signals? It's dead by every measure. Is it that the brain is simply malfunctioning? It's just some strange experience that we can't explain, but we can wave away? Or is the more straightforward experience, the more straightforward explanation that these people, we take their experience at face value, that their consciousness separated from their physical body, and that is how they have these memories in thousands of cases. Again, with details of the physical environment that they could not have known otherwise. And this is the same thing that terminal lucidity shows. When the brain is destroyed, a person can still function somehow. It's as though their spirit, it takes over the physical job that their brain was doing, keeping them alive, so that they can have one final goodbye with their families. So the brain is the veil. The brain is probably the thing that stops us from knowing who we are by design, so that we can experience this life and be fully immersed in it and fully learn the lessons of love that we came to learn. These are the common features, but as we go deeper, it gets even more profound. Before we get into the next section, I'd like to address the chat. We've got 2 people in the chat. I think Eleanor and Ian. I'm not sure who's there, but I'm hoping Eleanor's there so I can answer her questions. Ian says everybody's out buying food because they're worried about the end of the world. Yeah, that could be the case. Eleanor says, I think you already copied that. Not to be a downer, just that the in-person experience grabs people more than the internet one. So you agree that I should cancel the live stream? That's 1 vote for canceling the live stream. Let me know in the chat and in the comments what you guys think. Eleanor says, was it a president that had an NDE? No. What happened? Well, we'll get into the details on that particular case. But basically, in the vision of the flower in the sidewalk, she had the impression from her guides that what she did, loving that flower, was more important than being the president. Because we put all this weight and meaning and stock, value on these physical world accomplishments of the ego, and in heaven, none of those things matter at all. Again, we'll get into it. Right, that was the person's description, yeah. Ethiopian, I would never guess that, yeah? Yeah. Ethiopia is a fascinating place. There's a lot of history there. And most people don't know about it, so there might be something interesting is going on. I can tell you this much. I want to get my hands on an Ethiopian Bible. I want to have all 22 books of the Apocrypha. I want to see what they changed in the other books, if anything. I already covered the Dead Sea Scrolls and how they clearly show that the Old Testament has been changed to get rid of the idea that Yahweh had brothers and sisters and was not the highest God. They removed the phraseology that made it clear that there was a God above the Lord. Every time you read Lord in all caps in the Old Testament, that is Yahweh. And the Dead Sea Scrolls tell a different story. And scholars agree that the difference between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the modern translations shows a purposeful edit to avoid that conclusion. You can imagine why. So I want to get into the most profound part, in my opinion, or maybe not the most profound, but rather the most relevant thing for those of us here on Earth studying the afterlife. That is the life review. The life review is a rapid, panoramic reliving of your entire life. Not a remembering, but a reliving with full sensory and emotional detail, compressed into what feels like moments. The being of light, as most people describe it, sometimes it shows up as Jesus, some people call it God, asks you 2 questions. What have you done with your life? And how have you learned to love? This is reported consistently across cultures, ages, belief systems, including atheists and children. When we relive our lives, this isn't just watching a highlight reel on a television set. It is a full sensory experience. In almost every interview where someone describes a life review, they say, I relived everything. And they don't equivocate on that. They say they experienced everything. Time seems to work differently, and so they're able to experience the entire lifetime in moments. Again, their brain is flatlined, and yet they're able to revisit the most intricate memories of their life. This makes no sense. The memory is functioning better than it does when they are fully awake, alive, and vital. Their brain is dead, and yet they have better recall of the events in their life. And as we will see, there is even more going on in this life review. So here's a visual image, if you can imagine, of a life review. And we can't really even imagine it. You know, this picture doesn't do it justice. As I was getting ready for this presentation, I realized something incredibly important to make this point at this part. You are not alone during this life review. I realized that even myself, when I have a very firm belief in the life review and as it being part of the afterlife, and it's almost like a judgment. It's like a judgment day coming up. So you could say it's almost like hell light, or mini hell. Especially if you didn't do the right things, or we all worry that when we die we're going to be judged for all these things that were not perfect about us. But in every case, while watching their lives unfold, they are enveloped in this feeling of peace and love coming from this light being that accompanies them during the experience. What is that experience like? Every person who experienced the life review reports being accompanied by a being of unconditional love. They're not watching from a distance, and they're right there with you. The love doesn't flicker in and out or, go up and down based on the hard parts of the life review. And instead, they experience total acceptance and total truth simultaneously. It's not judgment day, and it's not punishment. It is the most sophisticated and compassionate teaching environment ever described. And we'll get into some more of the amazing features of the life review. This is what I think is probably the most amazing part of the life review and how it works. In the literature, it's called the empathic life review. And in cases where the life review went deeper, people experienced the empathic life review, where they become every person that they affected. This is actually, it's been very common in the interviews that I've read, but this is how it's described. The person feels what they felt, the other person felt as a result of their actions. The physical sensations transfer, not just emotions. And more than half experience the full empathic version. So that's in the research, half of the life reviewers experience the empathic version, where their consciousness is actually a part of the people who participated in their life, the people who they affected in positive ways. Every act of kindness, you feel the other person's gratitude. You see the ripple effects in their life. In some cases, to the 25th degree, they see these effects ripple through people's lives. And unfortunately, or fortunately, every act of cruelty is felt. All the effects of the cruelty is felt, down to the very thoughts and emotions that the people experiencing the person's cruelty experienced. So I want you guys to think about this. What would it feel like to become every person you've ever affected? Sometimes it's a little bit of a scary thought. That's why you're not alone when you do this. The being of light that holds you there. And, it varies. And I think we necessarily have a limited view of what the life review is really like, because I think the people who actually pass away, the people who actually go on to the next life and don't come back, they have a more complete experience. They may have a life review where their spirit guides or their family members join them, and they can discuss and debrief these experiences. And that's confirmed in some research also, that we're not going to have time to cover today, but there is research into pre-birth experiences and between life experiences. Up to 20% of the reincarnation cases talk about the being in heaven between lives. A full 1/5. And again, the fact that they don't remember doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I mean, pretty much everyone doesn't remember being in heaven. But this evidence says that it's there. You just have to, pass on to see it. And here, behind the veil in the physical world, we don't get to see it, because if we were able to see it, we wouldn't be able to live our lives. We wouldn't be able to focus on our lives and take them seriously. So again, in the empathic life review, it's not sympathy or imagining the other person's experiences. According to the experiencers, this is a total identification with the other person. They feel their physical sensations, their emotions, and their thoughts. So how would you live differently if you knew this was coming? Tell me in the chat, tell me in the comments. This is literally why the way of service exists. Not just because service is noble, but because this is the structure of reality. This is what happens when you pass on. I think we should be ready. I think we should be living our lives in accordance. And it turns out that when you do live your life in accordance with the way of service, everything else works out as well. All the other things that you care about. One of the great researchers of the near-death experience, Kenneth Ring, his conclusion from all this is that we are all the same person. That is, we are all one with God and with each other. And this is confirmed by the mystics. I want to talk about one particular life review, Mr. Tom Sawyer. This is a case from 1978. He crashed his truck and he was clinically dead for 15 minutes. There was a road rage incident. Okay, so sorry, my notes are kind of brief, so I need to remember this story. So he had this near-death experience from crashing his truck and was clinically dead for 15 minutes. During this near-death experience, he describes his empathic life review. And he remembers an incident in his life, not the same one, but an incident where an individual walked out in front of his car and almost made him crash into him. And on that occasion, Thomas got out of his car and attacked the man and punched him 32 times. In his life review, he remembers experiencing every single one of those 32 blows delivered to the other person from that other person's perspective. And he also was revealed to him everything that led up to that moment. The man who was walking and not thinking about walking into the street was grieving his wife and had an alcohol problem. Needless to say, this radically changed his life. In addition to this negative experience, he also experienced that as a 9-year-old, he had loved a tree. And in his life review, he felt what the tree experienced, receiving his love. He's quoted as saying, "Our way of grouping things into alive and not alive is only from our limited physical point of view." So what does this tell us about the nature of consciousness? In that moment, he wasn't just Tom Sawyer anymore. He was the other man. And so he got to experience everything that happened from that man's perspective. He got to experience what it was like to be the tree that was loved by him as a child. Other near-death experience reports that everything is alive, and our categories of alive and not alive are physical world limitations. Yogananda describes this in his many works, how people will incarnate as rocks first and then move their way up through plants and animals and more advanced animals and finally into humans. And I think that it might not be all that as linear. I'm just speculating on the nature of what you could do when you're a spirit, but in some near-death experiences, they describe going and seeing what it's like to be that tree over there, or that rock over there, or that bird over there. There's another story, Galadriel K. from the Near-Death Experience archives. A 10-year-old girl who had died from cold exposure and was brought back, she reported feeling what she had made animals and bugs feel during her life review, and it permanently changed her relationship with insects after she returned. This is, again, a child, right? And she was changed forever by what the life review showed her about consciousness in every living thing. Kind of gives a new view on the idea of hugging trees. And you can imagine the innocence of a child interacting with their favorite tree. And God sees that as profoundly meaningful. All right, I just want to make sure we've covered everything. So I want you guys to notice that the life review uses the same tools but deploys them differently based on what the soul needs to learn. In Sawyer's case, he needed to feel the 32 blows because the lesson was that violence is bad, obviously. And that was a very visceral lesson. In another case, that I haven't told you yet, but there's a case where a woman named Morrissey was working at a hospital, and there was an old lady who got no visitors, and she went in and fed her graham crackers. And the woman kissed her arm as she did so, because she couldn't do much else. I don't think she was verbal either. In her near-death experience, her life review, that was shown to her as one of the most profound acts of her entire life. Her lesson was about the hidden significance of small acts of kindness. In another example, a 10-year-old, a gentleman who had a near-death experience went back to when he was 10 years old and was acting as a bully, and he saw that the negative emotions that he caused in his victims radiated out into rocks and trees and flies and birds and animals. And his lesson was that everything that he does has an effect on everything around him. Again, hallucinations don't have teaching objectives, but near-death experiences and the life review do. Checking in with the chat. No comments. We're moving on. Ooh, it is hot today. Wow. Even though it's winter. I think it was 80 degrees here. It's crazy. I'm sweating a little bit. Hopefully you guys can't tell. I drink some water. I should probably should have muted the button while I do that. Oops. Can hallucinations be categorized as messages as well? Maybe. But the scientific research shows that near-death experiences are definitely messages, not just messages, right? They're literally experiences. And I do argue, and I say, I don't think, like I said, debate me, bro. The experiences are these people left their body and had an experience in heaven. That's what the scientific data shows. That's not the case with hallucinations, right? Snowy by Matthew. Hey, we got 4 viewers. All right. You guys can chime in, you know. I mean, I already know you guys like the live stream, so I'm not going to ask you, but I was talking about earlier. I don't know. Sometimes I second guess myself doing this work because I'm talking to a camera and showing up live and nobody's showing up live. So I'm like, what's the point? But at least we're getting good footage, I think. Are we getting good footage? I hope so. How's the presentation so far, guys? What do you think? Hit the like button and subscribe and, you know, for the algorithm, etc., whatever. Hallucination is depending on what drug you're taking. Yeah, and, you know, like I said earlier, there's DMT and mescaline and all sorts of, you know, magic mushrooms, and people have had profound experiences, but they don't compare to near-death experiences as far as what the studies show. The studies show that near-death experiences are just on a totally different level. And maybe, you know, you're able to kind of pierce the veil a little bit with the hallucinogen, but you're not literally going out of your body and into the world of heaven, or at least the transition space between the physical world and heaven, and meeting spirit guides on their turf. Maybe spirit guides come to you if you take mushrooms. You know, I've heard people describe it. But again, the consistency is what's amazing about these near-death experiences. The consistent structure of the experience, that they follow a cascade. Matthew, you weren't here for it earlier. I'll show it to you really fast if I can find the slide. Yeah, there's a clear order of experiences in the near-death experience. And they're literally called stages in the research. There's 5 stages that Kenneth Ring covers. There's peace, body separation, the tunnel and darkness, seeing the light, and entering the light. And progressively fewer people experience that, and it's directly correlated to how close they came to really dying. So those are the things. That's just a few things that make the near-death experience more scientifically interesting than hallucinations. It's not to say that hallucinations and drug-induced experiences aren't interesting, but I think that the evidence around near-death experiences has been ignored, as I described earlier. Hopefully I did justice to the rant I wanted to give at the beginning of the presentation about how ridiculous it is that this evidence has been around for 50 years and it's been totally ignored and shoved under the rug. And this is not minor evidence. Again, $800 million people globally have probably had a near-death experience. Funny enough, I was playing tennis. I was talking about near-death experiences. And in the locker room, my tennis partner told me, oh yeah, I had one. And I need to get the details, but I remember, you know, he said he had an out-of-body experience and he felt the peace and the love. I should encourage him to, you know, put his account in the, you know, the 5,750 documented accounts. He can add his name to that list. Who's shutting it under the rug? I got shadow banned talking about that last time. I was shadow banned for 30 days. I can see exactly how it happened too, because I talked about something I'm not supposed to talk about. I would not say such things if I were you. Shadow banned. I talked about it though today. I mean, the church, the historic church, the Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. You know, the people in power. They shoved this stuff under the rug and made it crime by death, heresy to talk about it. And so for 1,000 years, it was in the dark. Nobody knew anything about it. And now we live in a new age, and they can't suppress it anymore. There's so much evidence that they can't hide it, so they just ignore it. But I personally am trying to make it hard for them to ignore it. I'm trying to make it hard for you to ignore it. Because the implications are so profound that you need to start living the way of service. You're going to feel that way. The same way these near-death experiencers feel. And this is, I think we'll get into this in a future presentation if we have one, or a future video, whatever. Maybe it won't be live. Hopefully it will. I like being live. I'd rather be live, to be honest. I'd rather be live than record something and then release it later. That's just how I feel. I've enjoyed being live, even if only one person shows up and it's my mom. That's okay. But that's not the case. It usually isn't the case. Usually at least one or two people who aren't my immediate family show up. So I guess I should stop complaining about it. Matthew says, oh, it just takes the right person to see the video and it goes viral. Yeah. I mean, and these live streams are going to be here for forever. I mean, I hope they're here forever, or at least 50 years or 20 years or 10, even 10, 5 years. People can find them for a long time. I hope that's the case, and I think it is. So maybe someday one of them will go viral, and then they can look at the rest of my work. I'm not doing it for myself, although it's hard to do it when I don't think it's having an effect. But I'm doing it to help the world. I'm doing it to help people. I'm giving this information out freely. And, I think there's a lot of facets to it. I want to do life coaching. I want to heal people. I want to help people with their lives in all sorts of different ways. So we'll get there. We'll get there. Matthew says, I've heard that some that have said they were invited into the light but chose to come back. The most common thing that I hear is that they don't want to come back. They're in heaven and they're like, this is awesome. I'm home. I love this place. I don't want to go back to Earth. Like that's not anywhere near as fun as here. And their spirit guides, or Jesus in many cases, tell them you need to go back because your mission isn't completed. And you entered into this, and he describes how the water pinned him underneath it, and he physically couldn't get himself out of that position. And so he felt himself drowning, or he felt himself, I don't think he doesn't describe feeling himself drowning, because often these near-death experiencers don't experience anything negative. What he experienced was, oh, I can't get out. And he remembers kind of giving up eventually the struggle because he felt like he couldn't physically get out. And near the end of his near-death experience, the guide that was with him said to him, do you remember when you were wrestling as a child and you were mad at yourself that you didn't give it your all and lost the wrestling match? And he said, yes. And he said, the guide said, this situation is the same. You could get out. And when he agreed to go back, he was able to get out. He got out, and he describes how he summoned every ounce of his strength, and I think he might have been given more strength, and pushed himself out of the waterfall and didn't drown. He survived, obviously, because he came back to tell us this story. Heaven, nirvana, all religions teach that glory is peace, free, and joy. And now you can add scientific evidence to that list, Matthew. All right, we're going to continue because I've got a lot of material here, and I'm only, I think I'm 2/3 of the way through. Empathic life review. We talked about Thomas Sawyer and loving trees. All right, so this is an amazing part of the life review. The ripple effect. Your actions don't stop with the person you directly affected. These people experience the empathic experience of their effects on people, but then they also report experiencing the effects of their actions 16, 20, 25 degrees removed from the person that they directly impacted. In one case, she described dozens of times removed. In another case, Danian Brinkley's description, military operations cascading through communities. And it's amazing because I've spoken here about, I'm obviously anti-war. I'm also violent policing or, basically government violence. And I've heard several accounts of military and police describing their life reviews as being profoundly negative, profoundly painful, because of the negative ripple effects that their actions had through families and networks of families, extended families and friends, all these things. There is actually modern research unrelated to near-death experiences, a study by Christakis and Fowler, where generosity triples as it cascades through social networks. So scientists measured 3 degrees. Near-death experiencers can see it exponentially more powerfully. Just checking my notes, make sure I didn't miss anything I want to cover. So basically, again, this is why we do the way of service. And this is maybe to encourage me right now, because I'm looking over at my viewers and I'm seeing the number not be high, but maybe from just one person getting this information, maybe in a replay, maybe one of you right now, the ripple effect will cascade out. And when I am in my life review, or maybe in a deep state of meditation even, I can see some impression of what that's like. And then when I am with God reviewing my life, I can see the full effect of any positive action we take, any time that we choose to take on the way of service. And what all of this information tells us is that every single small act of kindness has the most profound effects, and on the most important scale, on the scale of heaven. And what did you do with your life? These things are the most important things. So you can imagine this is just an attempt at a visual representation of this ripple effect. Souls rippling out through the cascade and network of people. And it's 3-dimensional and 4-dimensional across time, and even more dimensions probably than we can even imagine. So the question is, in life, what actually matters? This is the story I told earlier, the flower growing out of the crack of the sidewalk that no one else noticed but one small little girl. And in her life review, it was obvious to her that that was the most important thing that she had ever done. And I think this particular woman was very career-oriented. She probably lived a pretty selfish life. And so seeing this in her life review and her near-death experience changed her life forever. So the woman in question is Kimberly Clark Sharp. She experienced it as the most important moment of her entire life. Diane Morrissey, if you want to look up the case yourself, the graham crackers feeding to an elderly woman that I described for you, and pushing a stranger's car, and ironically, she rushed off before the stranger could thank her. That was revealed to her in her life review. Those were her only 2 special deeds in her life review. Another woman, she gave attention to an unloved boy at camp, and that mattered more to her than being president. Oh, maybe I had them mixed up. That was the case where it was revealed to her that her loving this one unlovable person at camp as a child mattered more than being president. Howard Storm encountered Jesus in his near-death experience, and he asked him, what am I supposed to do? And he said, love the person that you're with. Jonathan S.'s case, the review did not focus on things that he was worried about. Things like swearing or drinking, sex, what religion he had, how much money he had, but instead it was focused entirely on how he treated people and whether he used his gifts to help them. There's a quote from another near-death experiencer: "There are no bonuses for power, position, or wealth." I have a few more details here. Jonathan S., he said in his review, he did not focus on how many F-bombs I dropped, how many women I slept with, how much I drank, my abandonment of religion, pornography, money, or any other nonsense, and instead focused entirely on interactions with people and whether he used his gifts to help them. The clearest single demonstration that the review's grading rubric is completely different from what religion and culture tells us matters. So why do small acts outweigh everything else that the world tells us it matters? The life review, every life review researcher comes across decades of documents that says the same thing. Career, money, status don't matter. The world, the physical world, Earth's value system is completely inverted from what the life review reveals. The things that register are the moments of genuine attention, kindness, love, especially when no one's watching. A cup of love given to a flower that nobody else noticed. And remember, we're living under the scientific establishment's worldview that shoves all of this evidence under the rug and ignores it. It ignores that the truth is that we are supposed to be loving each other under every circumstance. So this is the foundation of the way of service. It's not philosophy or religion. It's what people consistently report in the scientific literature. That is the grounding basis of the way of service. And from there, you can also see that it shows up in the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of Krishna, the teachings of Buddha, the teachings of Lao Tzu, and every other mystic, avatar, and great teacher throughout history has taught these same things that are now confirmed by science, evidence. Matthew says, my niece was really angry. My brother-in-law told her to hug a tree. Apparently the tree was too small and it killed the leaves on the tree the next day. So your comments about nature feels... it seems like I cut off thought there. But interesting, maybe she hugged the tree with a negative feeling. You actually remind me of a story that I heard over the weekend. I attended a new church this weekend, and they had a book study. And in it, we discussed one of the most famous experiments, which is one where you put 3 cups of water and rice on a table or somewhere, and each day or multiple times a day, one of the cups you say something nice to, and then the second cup you say something mean to, and then the third cup you ignore completely. And I've seen pictures of these experiments. You know, the cup of rice that is given praise ferments and becomes like rice wine. The cup that is scorned and scolded, it rots basically. And then the one that's ignored has the worst possible outcome. It rots dramatically. And in this book group, the lady was telling me that she actually did this experiment in her science class. And I was like, man, I wish I was in that science class. And then she described how she was one of the stupid kids because she had dyslexia. She was put in the remedial science class. And that's where they did this experiment. You know, I was usually in the advanced science classes. We wouldn't do such a stupid experiment in the advanced class. Turns out she was doing the most profound experiment in the remedial class. And she told me that they did it with plants. They had 3 identical plants that they cared for in the same way, except for the words of affirmation or the words of negativity or the complete ignoring that they did. And she said that the first 2 plants died very quickly, even though they were being fed and watered. Another perfect example, and perhaps what you're describing, Matthew, is that exactly. So if the brother-in-law told her to hug a tree, but she was feeling very negative, maybe she transferred her negative feelings into that tree and hurt it. Matthew says, when we die, I don't think we will be asked what doctrine we adhered to, but how well did we live others? Did we love others? You're right, but you don't have to add the words, I don't think, because there are 5,700 cases that confirm that the spirit guides, the light, God, Jesus, that they encounter don't care. They don't care about which church you belong to. What they care about is, how did you love? What did you do with your life? Matthew says, we have a sapling growing on the way to the girls' cabins. They say hello and thank you to the tree. It's growing really well. A few other saplings purchased at the same time are not growing as well. So, you've done the experiment. Isn't that fascinating and amazing? Really changes the way you live your life if you really incorporate this stuff. And that is the whole purpose of the way of service. I'm trying to make the strongest possible argument that you should take this seriously. This isn't just interesting or fun to hear about. You should be taking this seriously. And I believe you will see the blessings of God in your life if you do. And again, we're all conditioned to say, I believe. It's not even I believe. I know from my own experiences and from the evidence that has been documented. And it has been documented that all of these people who have near-death experiences, especially in the most profound ones, their lives change irrevocably for the better. One dramatic example is someone who was part of the mafia became a counselor for children after his near-death experience. And there are many other such cases, just like that one. All right. Only a couple more slides. So during the life review, people experience judgment, but they don't experience judgment from God or from Jesus or from the light or from their spirit guides, but rather they experience judgment from themselves. All judgment comes from within because you see the impact clearly of your own decisions. And the seeing is the growth. Nobody needs to punish you. The punishment is simply the consequences of your own actions. It's not a courtroom, but a classroom. And it's not punishment, but education. And I want to mention a plug for my Eternal Hell is a Mistranslation video. Eternal punishment in hell is a mistranslation. The word punishment that Jesus uses, there are two Greek words. One means punishment retributive to hurt the person, and one means rehabilitative punishment to help them or to teach them. That is the word Jesus used. And so what Jesus taught lines up perfectly with this. It is not punishment, it is education. It is not hell, it's a loving learning experience. And ultimately is a celebration and a debriefing of the lifetime. As described by two of the near-death experiencers, quote, "You are a judger, you do the judging. You are the toughest judge you will ever have." And complete acceptance with only one loving, "Don't you think you could have done it this way?" type of comment. That's as close as God gets to telling the person they should have done it differently. They're just like, "Hey, you could have done it like this, right? Just a little nudge." And again, that's what's profound in these near-death experiences and these life reviews. All of the mistakes, and again, this is a quote. I should have put more of these quotes. I guess I'm glad there's only 3 people watching, because I'm going to do a better presentation of this sometime. There's so many quotes that I want to bring to you guys. And One of them is the spirit guide tells the individual making mistakes is acceptable as a human. And the way that mistakes are presented in the life review, always from the spirit guide's perspective, is this is just part of your learning process. This is just how you're learning. This is how you're learning the lessons that you have signed up to learn, that you want to learn to grow as a spirit. Every negative thing that happened was for the ultimate good because it is helping you grow, and in some cases, it's helping others grow. And what are we growing in? Our ability to love each other under every condition. A collective lesson in love, as Laura Lynn Jackson puts it. I think I have a couple other quotes here. It is not God who judges us after we die. The purpose is strictly for education, enlightenment, and spiritual growth. Another quote from Victor Philip, near-death experiencer: no condemnation, no right or wrong, complete acceptance and understanding with only one, with only one loving, don't you think you could have done it this way? Type of comment. So what does this unconditional love plus self-judgment tell us about the nature of God? This is not the punishing God of fire and brimstone. And it isn't a God who doesn't care what you do either. It's something more profound. Someone who provides total acceptance and total truth simultaneously. Love and truth together. When I was putting together this presentation, I realized that those two things have always been near and dear to me, and it's often in ways that are difficult to handle with other people, because when other people don't choose to follow the truth or listen to the truth, it really breaks my heart. But the pure truth of the life review, the unfiltered truth of every impact of every decision and action that you took and even thought that you had, that the effects of those things on everything and everyone around you are revealed to you completely in the afterlife. But simultaneously, you are given complete and total love and acceptance. There is no better educational environment, no better way or chance for you to improve yourself, to eliminate your bad habits, than under those circumstances. Just checking my notes. Sometimes I think about I often think about the life review, and also sometimes when people do shitty things, I'm like, well, at least they'll experience that in their life review. You know, they'll get to see all the negative effects of that decision that they made, and the rippling effects through the cascade of social networks. And part of me is a little mad that they're going to get this pure loving experience, but you know, it's God's design. It's not for me to criticize. But, you know, as these near-death experiencers describe, these things are profoundly painful and profoundly moving in the way that they change them permanently. They grow them on this eternal scale, on the soul level. They experience these things and they know how important they are. So I don't think I have any real cause to complain. This is also why it's clear to me that God delivers perfect justice in the end for everything. Perfect justice for our good deeds and perfect justice for our bad deeds. And this is why karma exists, because there's evidence, scientific evidence for reincarnation. It appears to me that we go back to Earth so that we can recreate the situation where we made the bad decision, and in this case, make the right decision or make a better decision. And then over time, we learn these lessons and we can go deeper and further, closer to becoming like Jesus, as he describes. What would Jesus do? As he said, these and greater acts shall you perform. And Jesus was probably talking about across lifetimes. Maybe not in this lifetime, and maybe yes in this lifetime. If you devote yourself to the way of service and to the teachings of Jesus, you can do these miracles. But you have to let go of your fear and your limiting beliefs. And that's what I'm here to help you do. Especially because the science shows that those limiting beliefs are wrong. Not just Jesus, not just the Bible, not just the spiritual teachers and the mystics, but the very science that can study these things says this is the truth. I thought that was a good rant, but we're down to 2 viewers. I wonder if I'm having technical issues, but whatever. Not going to worry about it. All right, we've only got a couple more slides. I thought this was pretty interesting. How common is the life review? We talked about the stages, rings, deep stages. It occurs. The life review happens in the deepest stages of the near-death experience. So in the prospective study, only 13% experienced the life review. 54% of self-reported people, so the people who had the most profound life near-death experiences, describe a life review. But what's amazing is that 13% falls directly in that range of 10 to 16% of the people who reach stages 4 and 5 of this model. And let's go back to that diagram. You see, seeing the light and entering the light, this is usually where someone experiences a life review. And the number of people who experience that are 10 to 16%. Again, the closer they are to irreversible death, the closer they come. And so what we see is that the 13% corresponds directly, the 13% of prospective study, that's where they study everyone who had a cardiac arrest, not just near-death experiences. Everyone who had cardiac arrest, 13%, or maybe it's the number of people who had near-death experiences. I think that's actually correct. Those are the people who had the life review. And so my argument, this is an original argument I didn't find in the text, this is my scientific contribution tonight, is that the life review isn't actually rare, but rather that most people are pulled back before they reach the life review. The closer someone is to irreversible death, the deeper the experience, and so I would argue that all of us will have a life review upon our death. So the life review and these near-death experiences, the 5 stages that Ring describes, this is just the beginning of the afterlife. And some other interviews with individuals who remember their previous lives and who remember their time between lives in heaven explain that there is these other phases also to the afterlife: healing and restoration, a time and a place of recovery where the soul is made whole again. A deeper review of the life review with context. So the life review is described again, but in these cases, it's not just a brief flashing of the life. I think it's probably far more involved of reviewing the life, and where highly evolved beings provide purpose and meaning for everything that you experienced. And then there's a reunion with your soul group. It's I remember one particular near-death experience where they describe seeing a grand building ahead of them, and remarkably, in a lot of these near-death experiences, they describe seeing like a force field or a boundary where they knew that they weren't allowed to go past that boundary, or else they would not be allowed to return. And I think in one case they saw the building, like some beautiful castle ahead of them, and their guide told them, "Oh yeah, that's where we would celebrate your life and your return to heaven, but we're not going to do that because you're going back." And so you can imagine there's a celebration discussion with the souls who incarnated alongside you. And then people describe planning for their next lives and choosing their next incarnation based on what they want to learn. So the life review is an opening act of a much larger homecoming. And I would hope and imagine that, you can spend as much time in heaven as you want. Although I think I have heard stories where if you want to learn this lesson, the life that is going to best teach you this lesson is down there right now, and you got to go. And souls have a choice. It's like, oh, I don't want to go right now. Okay, well, the next one might not be as good a match for your lesson. But this information, this study, I'll probably do it this evening, honestly. I'm so fascinated by this stuff. I want to get into the research of what do people describe in their pre-birth experiences, their in-between life experiences, their study of heaven. We just scratched the surface of the afterlife in this presentation. So if all this is waiting for us, how should we live right now? That's the question I want you guys to take home with you tonight. Hey, we have 5. Thanks, Marco, for coming. Welcome to the live stream. Let's see. Matthew says, we bought a bag of deer feed just to have a safe space for deer. We see so many all the time in our yard. So many miracles. Yeah, and it seems like in your life review, you're going to get to experience every deer's sense of gratitude to you for leaving food out for them. Makes me want to go leave food out there. Reading this research over the last week made me want to treat my dog even better, because sometimes I get pretty annoyed. We have a giant dog. He's a puppy, and he jumps on small children. He gets aggressive with mail carriers. He destroys property. He runs away. He chases livestock. He does all sorts of things that are not good, and I get pretty mad sometimes. I even have a short about this that I thought was pretty funny. But that was when I was shadow banned, so nobody saw that short. I gotta treat him better. I gotta do my best at least. Yeah, as Susan says, we should live with love in our heart. Exactly. Matthew says, I would say the deeper the experience, the more dramatic changes are made. Some lighter experiences may be just enough for the person to self-correct. I wonder if a study shows bigger means more change. Yeah, and Matthew, I'm going to get into that data. I mean, that's a huge part of these near-death experiences. And in fact, people come back with psychic powers. And it's incredible to read some of the accounts of what happens. One person had such profound empathy and telepathic abilities that they find it hard to function. So yes, the results of these near-death experiences are profound and incredible, and I will be getting into that in a future live stream or video. I couldn't fit that into tonight's presentation. I need to learn to type less to get my comments in. Yeah, I know it's stupid that the chat box cuts you off, and I'm sure it's not easy for you guys to participate in the way that you want to, because there's like a limit or whatever. It's imperfect. Maybe someday I'll simulcast to other platforms that are maybe better than YouTube for live streaming. I do have one more slide, I think. Let's see, did I miss anything? Da-da. Yeah. So this says next week. Yeah, I think we'll probably do a live stream next week, despite my disappointment that we didn't have a lot of live viewers, but that's okay. What do near-death experiences do to people? I'm probably going to be so excited about presenting this information that I'm going to just do a live stream anyways, even if I'm annoyed that, there's not a lot of viewers, but it doesn't matter. It's okay. And I'm not shadow banned anymore, so I think maybe we'll be doing better as time goes on here. I'll just make sure not to talk about those people that I'm not supposed to talk about. So as I mentioned before, near-death experiencers develop psychic abilities, precognition, telepathy, healing. These life changes persist without diminishment over 20 plus years in the follow-up studies. There's cases where atheists became ministers and materialists abandoned their careers for service. Kenneth Ring, the researcher of many of these studies, said, you can gain these effects by studying near-death experiences deeply. If studying these cases can transform you the same way dying does, why wouldn't you? So that's my presentation today, folks. If you guys have any comments or questions, please put them in the chat now. Hit that like and subscribe button for the algorithm. Maybe we'll get some randoms in here. We have gotten randoms before, people I don't know. Usually it's just friends and family. For now, that's okay. Like I said, I think I gave Claude my transcript and he scolded me for complaining about the amount of people who watch. You know, I'm just being real with you guys. You know, I'm just real with you. I think the hardest thing is seeing that there's fewer people over time. But everything in life goes through waves, right? So that's a natural course. No graph of life or stock chart graph is a straight up line. Even though I'd love for way of service to just follow a straight line up into the sky, become well known, so that everyone on the planet could follow the way of service and transform the planet into this beautiful heaven on earth where everybody's helping each other and living the life of love that we're supposed to be living. But if all that happened tomorrow, then we'd be like, what now? We'd be kind of bored. So I think experiencing the growth and the evolution over time is part of the purpose of this life. Eleanor says, that seems like an easy way to become telepathic, at least a lot easier than almost dying. Exactly. And I'm very excited to get into the actual data about, how that works, how that happens. Maybe I'm not sure that Kenneth Ring has scientific data to show that you can gain those effects by studying, but he is a scientist. That's what he bases everything on, is on this evidence. So he probably does have some evidence, and I'm eager to get more research projects done. I asked Claude, and he comes back with 700 sources in 15 minutes, and just the incredible information that I'm able to uncover thanks to AI and the internet is just amazing. And I am so excited about it and so excited to share it with you guys. Matthew says, visualize a larger audience. How many would be enough? Set a number. Within 2 months, you will have it. Yeah, you're probably right, Matthew. Yeah, I don't know. How about 10 next week? I'm going to do that. I'm going to meditate on getting 10 concurrent viewers during the live stream next week. Let's see if it can happen. We made it to 5 today. We're halfway there. I think we've gotten up to 10 before, so that's not asking too much. But I don't want to go crazy, right? Like I said, I'll be like, I want 50 next week. Well, that's not going to happen. Not with that attitude, at least. Higher. You put a number in there. What do you think? What's a reasonable number? I'll go look at in the way of service records and see what the top number was. Was it? I feel like it was 10. It might have been 11. I don't know. Should we go 12? Eleanor says she just saw 7. Yeah, I always get this warning, so maybe I don't get to see really how many people. But I'll be able to see in the stats afterwards. It's not important, I do get hundreds, if sometimes thousands of views on the shorts that I make out of these live streams. Hundreds of views on the long form, although it's a lot of work to edit the long forms and make them something that I'm proud of and willing to release. Heck, it's just a lot of work just in general, all the things that we got going on with small children and everything. Believe. Yeah, the thing is, like, I don't want to have to, like, constantly be thinking about, like, creating numbers or increasing the numbers. I mean, I guess if it bothers me, I should. But I'm like, I'm doing the work. I'm earnest. I'm honest. I'm trying to help people. The numbers should take care of themselves, So it's hard for me to motivate myself to visualize a higher number. But I guess on the other hand, I shouldn't be bothered by the lower number. So, yeah. Eleanor asks, have you had any growth in perceptive abilities since studying near-death experiences? I mean, yes. I guess, I've started studying them earnestly in 2024, and since then my life has radically changed. I have profound synchronicities every day, if not every hour. I feel like I have a much stronger intuition about what's going to happen and what's the right thing to do. Sometimes you have an intuition about where you're supposed to go or what you're supposed to pack in a bag when you go to town or things like that. I've definitely noticed that far more over the last couple of years. I've had powerful, almost prophetic dreams. I've had visions of things that happened the next day. I remember having a vision of a bug crawling out of a space, and then the next day I saw that exact thing happen. And it was such an ordinary moment, but it registered with me because I had already seen it, and then when I saw it in my mind's eye, I was like, that's going to happen tomorrow, and then it did. So absolutely that has happened to me. Yes. I have had a growth in perceptive and psychic abilities since studying near-death experiences. Yes. All right. Well, we have been going for almost 2 hours, which is pretty good. Do you guys have any other comments or questions? Put them in the chat. My name's Danny with The Way of Service. I'm live every Tuesday. And I love you guys. I love sharing this stuff. I love studying this stuff. I love making these presentations. Matthew says we have synchronicity together when we talk. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm telling you, that's my daily experience. And it does happen more when I talk to you and your wife, Matthew. People who are more tuned in, I feel like we get to share the synchronicities, which is really fun and exciting. Susan says, thank you for all of your research. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Susan, for noticing. Yeah, it's a lot of work to put these together. I work for usually 3 straight days leading into, I usually work Sunday, Monday, Tuesday solely on preparing for these live streams. And that's one reason I'm like, should I be doing them? Because maybe I'd have more results if I put more effort into making shorts or making long form videos rather than doing these live streams. But the live stream is how I like doing it. So it's hard to get off of it. But then pretty much half my week is devoted to preparing for these live streams. So, I'm very ambivalent on it, and I'm trying to just sense what the right thing to do is. I guess that's what I'm trying to do, because I have used my intuition to answer a lot of these questions before, and it usually is spot on. So, but I think sometimes the things that are closer to your heart, closer to your ego, like I don't want to be wrong about doing live streams or starting a YouTube channel because I've put so much work into it, and I've already made a lot of progress, and I feel like people do appreciate it. People like to watch these videos, but sometimes I wonder if I'm getting the right bang for my buck. Not that I'm going to quit the way of service. Absolutely not. It's just, is this the best way to do the way of service for me? Some parts of me say yes, because I'm a good communicator. I'm a good researcher. I'm a good presenter, I think. At least I'm a decent presenter for how long I've been doing it. But, maybe it's better in person. Maybe I should be doing in-person healing or in-person counseling. Ideally, I'd be doing all of the above. That's kind of what I want, is to maybe do a little bit of YouTube over here and then over there, do things in person, yada, yada. I have to give you guys my life story. Susan says, do what you like, remember. Yeah, follow your highest excitement. And usually I'm having a great time. It's just when I start the stream and I see there's only one viewer, I'm like, oh God. But I got to figure out a way to not let that make me feel negative. And actually that's ineffective. Trying to get something to not bother you is not the way to do it. You have to reframe it as a positive. So what is the positive about there only being one person, or what is the synchronicity? Because this is the truth. This is the present moment. So fighting against it is just a way to make yourself miserable. Have a guest that has a lot of viewers. Yeah, totally. Ask about the time frame. Yeah, I mean, if I push the stream an hour later or half hour later, would that make it easier for people to attend? Let me know. What do you guys think? I have asked this many times, but I feel like maybe I haven't asked that specific question, or maybe there's a better night. Maybe I should move it off of Tuesday. I can move it to Wednesday, or, part of me wants to do it twice a week because then I could definitely get a lot of people in, but it's just so much preparation. And I could do it with less preparation. Maybe that's another answer, is I should be doing it with less preparation. I just get so excited. I get so excited about the research that I prepare so many things. Eleanor says, I've had a few comments you didn't read. I wonder if you're not getting them. Yeah, it makes sense because I'm getting all these warnings. Maybe I need to do a test stream and figure out how to fix some of this stuff, because I always get this warning, and I don't know. I could start playing with it right now. Let's see. I'm going to output. I'm going to increase the bit rate. I feel like, yeah, let's read this. Let's do it right now. I'm going to do it right now because this is when it's actually useful to do this. Okay, I'm going to open Studio. What's the warning that it's telling me? The warning is bit rate is lower than the recommended bit rate. What is the recommended bit rate? We recommend you use a stream bit rate of 6,800. Oh my goodness. Okay. Let's try it. I mean, hopefully I won't lose the stream. 6,800. That's more than twice my current bit rate. That's crazy. All right. 6,800. Here we go. I'm going to press apply. I hope you guys can. All right. Nope. How we doing? Are we still there? It still says warning. Dropped frames is going up a lot. How's it look, guys? Can you still see me? Matthew says 7 is good for me if I'm in town, but you're not in town, buddy. So what time is better? What time's good for you all the time? Eleanor says, one comment once, I love the live stream format because it feels social. When I listen to videos alone on YouTube, it feels like it's all for my pleasure, even self-help stuff. I like that the live stream is not self-focused that way. Yeah, totally. You're right. So, good call. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm going to keep doing it. Maybe I should do it less often, or I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm just second guessing myself because there were fewer viewers at the beginning, and that's silly. It says I have a 2% drop frames, but I guess it's working out, so I don't know. I still have the warning, so I don't know if that even fixed anything. I should do some more research about this stuff, about how these things work, doing live streams. See, I don't have time to research how the live stream works. I'm too busy getting ready for the live stream and doing one. All those using fiber internet will be okay. Yeah, which I'm not doing. So that's the important part. Maybe you can have an in-person community that transfers to the live stream. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Matthew's point about finding, interviewing people who are more established, I really need to do that. And like I said, I keep staying in the same pattern each week. Like I'm overwhelmed with the work that I've taken on, and I need to drop some of it so that I can do something else, like contact people and actually try to set up interviews. Like that's a whole nother set of things to do. Matthew says, don't overthink. Yeah, that might be the problem. I'm like on autopilot each week, preparing for the live stream, creating shorts, and then having no time to do anything else different, not to do anything differently. I appreciate you guys telling me what you think. YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. As such, viewers will experience something not great, whatever. Okay. I'm doing my best here. My flux is kicking in. I don't know if that's affecting you guys, but I gotta turn it off. Disable. Should have disabled that a long time ago. It changed my... See, I had the wrong colors on the whole time. See, this is the goofy stuff that happens when you're an amateur live streamer like me. I'm trying to get the the information to speak for itself, you know? I'm like, this information is so powerful and so profound that I can't focus on doing a perfect presentation every time. There's just so much to convey. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking, Matthew. You're right. Well, I did think about doing this. I have this list of facts. And since you guys are still with me, I should maybe share them. Let's see. Put this on your screen. 18% of cardiac arrest survivors report near-death experiences. 13% of near-death experiences report a life review. 54% of self-reported cardiac arrest survivors describe their life review. 92% accuracy in verified near-death experience perceptions. This is one of the biggest pieces of evidence. One of the things that absolutely struck me when I was studying these things, the fact that people die, their brain is dead, and they can describe things that they have no business knowing. And then people shove this information under the rug, which is just absolutely insane. Matthew says, why does it do that? Matthew says, be still. I love your translation of be still. It hit us hard. It's not mine. That's just Hebrew. Hebrew says, be still means take your hands off. Yeah. Pretty powerful. I agree. All right, back to this list of factoids. "75% of near-death experiencers report supernormal consciousness." It's the same as the people who call it more than real. More than real. 70% of children surviving cardiac arrest report near-death experiences. Again, be like a child, as Jesus says, because the children are closer to God, closer to heaven. And so a higher percent of them, right? Only 18% of all cardiac arrest survivors report near-death experiences, but 70% of children surviving cardiac arrest report near-death experiences. Near-death experience life changes persist 20 plus years. Up to 800 million people have had near-death experiences. Here's the citation on the right. We covered a lot of these things. 18 double birthmark cases in the reincarnation files. That's 1 in 25,600 to the 18th power. Experimenters found organized brain activity 35 to 60 minutes into cardiac arrest and CPR activity. They find brain activity in times when the person should not have brain activity. And again, this does not correlate directly with near-death experiences, but there's no explanation for why the brain should be able to function like that. The P of 0.001, or a 1 in 1,000 chance that mediumship effects are to chance, is beyond what people require, 500 times stronger than what is required in medical drug approvals. Separate from near-death experience research is that generosity triples as it cascades through networks. Hey, Matthew says he's taken off. Thanks for joining us, Matthew. I really appreciate you. I love you, buddy. I love your contributions. Thank you so much. They kept me going today, so I really appreciate you, my friend. Thank you for joining. Eleanor asks, did you touch who it is that buries this under the rug? Yeah, I did. I mentioned that it's probably people who will shadow ban me if I talk about them too much, but also, the church, the Holy Roman Empire, and their successors. They're still around. Don't worry. And it's not just talking about the Vatican, but there's plenty of other organizations dedicated to stopping this information from getting out there. All right. Yeah, I think we covered all this stuff. feel free to read this stuff. Pause the replay if you want to read some of these factoids about the cases. Again, there are 5,700 near-death experience cases in the files, and they're all publicly available. So go check them out. Oh, Eleanor has a question. So in mediumship studies, the p-value, that's the chance that the effects are by chance, are 0.001. Okay, so that's a 0.1% chance that the effects found in the mediumship studies were by chance. For drugs, they need to show a p-value of 0.05. So that's 500 times more real effects in mediumship studies than what is accepted for drug approval. That's for those of you who don't understand or have studied statistics, so you can understand what the meaning of this number is. All right. That's all the material I have for you guys today. Love all these questions at the end. You guys really gave me that burst of energy at the end there to encourage me. So thank you so much. That really changes my perspective on doing this work. Because it's very difficult for me to pour my heart and soul into something and then only have my wife and mother show up. But then when my friends show up too and you guys ask questions and are engaged, it really turned it around for me. So thank you. And you can see the ripple effects of your good deeds this evening on me, and maybe the fact that I'll continue to do this work with energy and excitement and not worry about only getting 1 or 2 viewers at the very beginning of the stream. Thanks to you guys. So for those of you guys who are still watching and caught that message, thank you so much. I love you. And for those of you watching the replay, I love you also. And I look forward to talking with you and getting your reactions to this information. I find this information so incredibly profound and life-changing that I feel like I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't present it. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys next week. I'm Danny with The Way of Service. I love you, and I'm signing off.